Hello and welcome to the Trevor Roberts Talk Fest podcast. Tonight we're going to be working our way through The Third Door by Alex Banayan. This is step 2 of The Third Door. The book's broken into 5 steps. Last time we did step 1. And again, this is the wild quest to uncover how the world's most successful people launch their careers. The author is Alex Banayan. He wrote this book when he was 19 years old, or I should say he started the book when he was 19 years old. I think he was a little bit older than that when it got published. But let me just read a page here. This is going to give a good reminder. If you didn't, a good reminder of what the book is about. If you didn't listen to part 1, this is something that I read the first time. This will definitely tell you what the book's about. So, life, business, success. It's just like a nightclub. And he's 19 when he's thinking about this, so I think maybe 21, 22 when the book's actually published. So nightclubs are a big deal for that age, but it is a good visual. There's always 3 ways in. There's the first door, the main entrance, where the line curves around the block, where 99% of people wait around hoping to get in. There's the second door, the VIP entrance, where the billionaires, celebrities, and people born into it slip through. But what no one tells you is that there's always, always the third door. It's the entrance where you have to jump out of line, run down the alley, bang on the door 100 times, crack open the window, sneak through the kitchen. There's always a way. Whether it's how Bill Gates sold his first piece of software or how Steven Spielberg became the youngest studio director in Hollywood history, they all took the third door. So the book is awesome, and that's why we're working our way through it. But he interviews some incredible people, and the whole purpose of the book is to help someone who doesn't have all those connections necessarily figure out how to get started, or you have an idea or something you want to do. If you want to start a business, if you want to do something on your own, how do people become successful? It's really about success. He interviews Lady Gaga. So, how did she become successful when she didn't have sort of that in? She didn't get to take door number 2, if you will. A lot of people that we know of that are successful got to take door number 2, and that's fine. If I could take door number 2, I would, and I wouldn't have any shame in it. But if you don't have the option of taking door number 2, which only 1% of people do, it's either door number 1, where 99% of people go, and it's just waiting around in line. And when you do that, you're only going to get into so many. It's like when you go to Six Flags and you don't buy the fast pass and you wait in line. You get to go on a couple roller coasters and you get to have a good time in life, or your good time that day at Six Flags. But if you buy the fast pass and you know someone that works there, and you kind of go on a day where it's not busy, and you learn from somebody who works there the best route or little shortcuts, you can probably do everything you ever wanted to do in one day and just get an amazing experience. You get some advantages, you got to have some connections, you got to be intentional about it, you got to buy the fast pass. And so that's what the book is it's him interviewing people that became successful, and we learn how they got started in the very beginning. And he kind of talks about how no one ever talks about the very, very beginning. What did people do when they didn't have anything? Like, how did people get started? And um, I remember I've read through it a couple times. I will say a lot of it has to do with it's not necessarily repeatable. He does something and it sort of gets him to this step and it gets him to this step. And it just, the message that I get overall reading the book is that if you just do, eventually things will fall into place. Those that don't try never will win. But throughout along the way when you're reading it, there's just hundreds of very fascinating tips and fascinating stories along the way, and you really do get a lesson here and a lesson there, and things worth writing down, things worth thinking about. Not everything is repeatable in a sense that it's here's steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on how to get started when you don't have a plan. But at the same time, there are lessons that will help you figure out your next best step. So let's jump into step 2. Right. Actually, really quick before we do that, I'm going to do a quick recap. So, step 1 is called Ditch the Line. There's 3 chapters. The first one is Staring at the Ceiling. Second is The Price is Right. And third is The Storage Closet. So staring at the ceiling is when you're at that place in life where you're just not really sure if you're happy with where you're at, the direction you're going in life. For him, he was in college. So he's taking time to reflect on what he's doing in life actually where he wants to go. And the action I wrote down to take is that we should all take the time to just stop and say, am I okay with the direction I'm going in life? And for me, I'm a very intentional person, so pretty much I am okay with it, but there are some minor tweaks I wanted to make. But there has been a time in my past, go back like 10, 12 years, where I was just like him and I wasn't actually okay with it. And I think for a lot of people, they could be right now. They're in that sort of like that stage where they went to high school and then they went to college. Maybe they're in college and they're like, is this where I need to be? Am I studying the right thing? Is my major the right major? But it could be somebody that graduated, didn't know what to do, and then they got that first job, and then they've been in the job for 6 years, and maybe they got a promotion or two, and maybe they're dating someone, and maybe now they're living together. But it's sort of just like life is just happening to them, and they're just waking up every day and doing life and then going to bed. And it's not necessarily that intentional, and the direction they're going may not be where they actually hope to go. Sometimes in the back of our minds we have this dream or this vision of what life could be like, but that's not where life is taking us. So just taking the time to reflect is about chapter 1. Chapter 2 is The Price is Right. This is a fantastic story where he talks about how he hacked The Price is Right. He goes on The Price is Right. He ends up winning The Price is Right, gets all the money. Um, but the big lesson that he learns is that he needs to be vulnerable and ask others for advice. And throughout the whole story, he's asking everyone he possibly can for advice on how to play the Price is Right, because he really only figured out how to get onto the show, but he didn't know how to play. So he has to kind of work his way through on the spot of how to play. But the greater message is just there's no shame in asking people that have come before us how they did it. And it's like, even ask, even if you think you have nothing to learn from someone, pretty much everybody can teach you something. So that's one thing. The next is chapter 3, The Storage Closet. The storage closet is sort of like his hub. He calls it the storage closet, but really it's like a place in his home or wherever he's living where he only goes there to work on the mission. He never really talks about the importance of having one spot to be like your HQ to work on your mission, but that's sort of what it is for him. That's where he goes to work on it. And in this chapter, he really highlights writing down the mission. So that was my action here is just write down the mission, figure out what you want. If now there's a lot of lessons and tips you can take from this book, even if you don't want to start a business, or even if you don't want to become a successful musician or filmmaker or astronaut or something like that. But still, I still think the book is worth reading. If you do want to do anything like that, where you want to start something or you want to do something that's very difficult to do, even if it's running a marathon, it's write it down. Write down the mission. Okay. So that is a sort of a short recap. We're going to jump now into step 2, which is run down the alley. Okay. So this step begins with what he calls the Spielberg game. This is, of course, Steven Spielberg. And the chapter starts out with him thinking, now what? So he's learned that he wasn't going in the direction he wanted to go. And again, what he was doing was he was in college to do pre med, didn't want to do that, wants to write this book where he's going to interview successful people and figure out how they got started. He wants to do one person from every different type of industry. Then he gets the money to fund his mission. Then he writes down his mission. Now he knows everything he needs to do. He's got it on paper. He's got the money to make it happen. But now what? And he says, he doesn't know what his next step is. He finds himself getting stuck all the time. And again, it's like he's trying to figure out, what do you do in the beginning? And as he's trying to figure that out, he's getting stuck because he doesn't know what the next step is. So that's exactly why he's trying to get these interviews. But this is, I think, something that we all find ourselves in. I have tried a few different times to do something with YouTube or a podcast or something on social media or start a business here and there. And it is very hard, especially when you're not sure what the next best step is and you have very limited time. Unless you're in a situation where you can quit your day job to do that, you don't have a lot of time. And especially as you progress through life, maybe you have a family, you have other commitments, and so your sort of free time is just less and less and less. So as you're trying to work on that, it's like, now what? Well, what Alex does, oh, and he goes on to say, I think this was interesting. He says, sometimes in life, you just don't have a teacher telling you what to do next. And we all are creatures that hate just simply checking off a box in life. But when we don't have the boxes in front of us, we often don't know what to do, which is so true. It's like anytime you're doing anything in life and somebody has just given you a list of boxes to check, it becomes very mundane and we don't feel passion towards it. But anytime we don't have somebody laying out the path for us, we often don't know what the next step is. So it's like, um, I want to start a business. Now what? Alex says the hardest thing about achieving a dream isn't actually achieving it, it's stepping through your fear when you don't have a plan yet. I found this to be very true for me. It's sort of that, I don't know if you've ever heard, where you want to try to start something and you kind of do get your idea in mind, but you don't actually begin because you want to continue researching it. One time I tried to write a book and I thought, well, it was going to be a fantasy book. And I was like, okay, before I start writing, I want to build the world. And then I wanted to draw the map, and then I wanted to write some characters, and then I wanted to give the characters some backstory. I actually spent like 4 years developing 200 characters, backstory, how these people were connected, all these different like lore things. I drew several maps, and it became like a book that is almost like, I mean, it's huge. It's like 300 pages of just this character, this character. It's like, it's sort of like this, well, I don't want to compare it to the Silmarillion, but it's sort of just like a just a book that is about the world of a book, but then the actual book is never written. And then when you sat down to write the book, I was like, well, the process of writing the book was actually a totally different experience. Anyway, the reason I brought that up is that I never actually wanted to get started writing the book. I just wanted to prepare for it. And that was a big lesson for me, that sometimes you just have to do. You just have to jump in even though you're not ready. So that's not necessarily in this book, but that is something that he's talking about here, is like sometimes your fear when you don't have a plan prevents you from getting started. So the Spielberg game, he doesn't know what to do. So what he does do is he starts remembering, okay, be vulnerable and ask for advice. So he starts emailing professors and parents of his friends and basically anyone that he thinks of and he holds in high regard, and he's just telling them about the mission, the people who he wants to interview, because remember, he makes a list of all the people he wanted to interview back in step one. And he gets a hit. The administrative assistant at USC for like the film area emails him back, and she says, "Hey, Steven Spielberg is actually going to be at one of our events." Now, students aren't supposed to be let in. It's just sort of staff, faculty, people that work at USC in the film department. And she says that they meet in person, and she says, "You can come as my assistant, but don't tell anybody I'm letting you in." And in my mind, I'm like, why is she doing this? It's just, part of me is like, maybe that's just the way it is if you just ask. And this happens a lot throughout the book. He asks pretty bold things, and most of the time he does get a no. He gets no's. Like, he gets a lot of no's. But every once in a while he gets a yes, and sometimes he gets these yeses pretty early on. So this person doesn't owe him anything. She's never met him before in real life. And he just emailed her. So she doesn't see him or anything. It's just like, I don't know why she did it out of the kindness of her heart. But she says, "Don't tell anybody, but you can sneak in as my assistant and just don't do anything to get me in trouble." So he gets into this event where Steven Spielberg is actually there. And she tells him that he needs to prep before the meeting. So he's just hoping to get a chance to talk to Steven Spielberg. But at the same time, the assistant is like, "You're not actually supposed to talk to him because you're a student." It's kind of like a little bit of a sticky situation. But because Alex is going to get in and he's going to have his opportunity to talk to Spielberg, he preps for the meeting. Now, part of the prepping is just that he watched all of Steven Spielberg's movies, which would have been pretty cool to just go and watch them all and think, I'm going to go meet this guy and hopefully I'll get a chance to interview him. And now you're watching Jurassic Park and all the movies that he does. But during his prep work, Alex learns how Steven Spielberg got his start. So here's how it goes down. Spielberg gets on a Universal tour bus. Then he hops off and hides in a bathroom. I can only imagine this is like Universal Studios behind the scenes. Somehow he sneaks off and goes and hides in the bathroom. He waits for the tour bus to leave. You can see it out the window. So then once the bus is out, he just pops out behind backstage in Universal and just starts acting like he belongs there. Now, he meets a man named Chuck Silvers, and this becomes his inside man. This guy worked at Universal TV, and Chuck and Spielberg become friends. They start talking. Spielberg tells Chuck that he's an aspiring director. He wants to do this, but he's only 19 to 20ish. So he's very young. So what Chuck does is kind of likes the guy, likes the little kid, and admires him, and says, "I'm going to write you a 3-day pass. You can come back to Universal Studios and you can just sort of hang out. You can be here for 3 days." So Spielberg does this, but then on the fourth day, he borrows his dad's suit, borrows his dad's briefcase, and he just comes back and he waves at the security guy and says, "Hey, Scotty," to the security guard, and they just let him right in. And he proceeds to do this for 3 more months, every day, just coming back, acting like he's supposed to be there. And the whole time he's like sneaking into editing rooms, he's sneaking into sound stages, he's learning about making movies as much as he can, and he's listening in on conversations. He's even meeting Hollywood stars and big executives from the studio. He's asking them if he can go to lunch, and he's building relationships with them. Sometimes he would even sleep in the studio, bring a second suit, wake up the next day, and just pretend like he had just been there, like he just walked in. So eventually, his mentor, Chuck Silvers, kind of says, "Hey, I know what you're doing. You're kind of smoozing around here, meeting people, but if you want to make movies, what you really need to do is make a short film and then bring it to me." So he does. He goes and he makes a short film, brings it back to Chuck. The rest is sort of history. Chuck goes, takes it to the big people. It's amazing. Spielberg gets a contract. But the moral of the story here is you have to be bold. You have to jump off the bus. You have to go out and do something like that. But really, the big thing is you have to find your inside man or your inside person. He finds Chuck Silvers. He calls out Chuck Silvers as the person that, remember, first writes him the 3-day pass and also takes his short film to the big bosses. Sometimes in life, you find that person that is willing to do something for you for some reason. And it always seems to be that they just like you. It's sort of like we meet people and we like them. Sometimes we just hit it off and we have a soft spot for them. Something inside of us tells us that this person is special to us. And sometimes people meet us and they think that way about us. And a lot of times it has to do with just being genuine. If you're a genuine person and you let somebody know what your genuine interest is, they may connect with that in some way and they may want to help you. And then you can sort of pass that forward, hopefully, and help the next person down the way. But not everybody's going to be that way. So you do have to figure out who is your inside person and what you're trying to do. Back at USC's campus at the film student event, Spielberg finished his talk. He did some mixing and mingling around. He goes around the room, and Alex eventually gets up the courage to ask him for an interview. And here's what Spielberg said. He says, "Normally I'd say no. I don't do interviews unless they're for my foundation or to publicize the movie, but for some reason I'm going to give you a maybe." And basically what he tells him to do is get some of the other interviews that you want to get and then come back and see me, which makes sense. At this point, Alex has interviewed no one, and he's 19. But the idea of the mission sounds interesting, and Spielberg liked that he asked him. And so he tells him, go and get your other interviews and come back and find me. So the big takeaway for me in this chapter is that you have to find your inside person. And it's so true. Like, if you just think at your life, sometimes you're able to get ahead a little bit, and it's always by having an inside person. Now, I just had this is a real life example. There's a coworker of mine gets another job at another company. And I reach out to this coworker and I say, "How'd you do that? Can you tell me, how did this come about?" And basically they say, "Oh, so and so assisted me." And I'm trying to be, very non-descriptive about it on purpose. But basically, they had an inside person. So it's just such a great example, but I don't want to go too much into the details there. But um, this is a totally different industry, not related to me. But one of my best friends worked for a company for, I think, 17 years. Isn't really that happy. Worked his way up very high. Isn't really happy, and it's honestly a only brighter future. He's worked his way up very high, but there's another level of corporate world that can just go even higher, where he's going to be making a lot of money, but the money sort of correlates in this industry with the amount of time that you're putting in. So as he continues to move up and make more money and all that, he's going to have more stress and more time put in and less personal time. The work-life balance wasn't very good. But other than that, he was foundational. He was exceptional at his job and they really liked him. So in that sense, it was good. Well, he has an inside man with another company. He's able to earn his own job. He earned it for sure, with the new company, ends up quitting that job, gets a new job, and it's a very, very good new job, one that they just don't hand out to people, and one that's highly coveted. Now, did he earn it? Well, if you look at his resume, he was more than qualified, probably more qualified than plenty of people that have gotten the job. I mean, he had done a tremendous amount of stuff to help prepare him for that role during his 17-year career. But at the same time, he had that inside man be like, "Hey, the position is open." So first of all, he might not have even known that job existed. Like he might not have even known to apply for it. He might not have even known that it was a thing. And then he knows it's a thing because of his friend. Then his friend's like, "Hey, the position's open. I think you should apply, and I will, you know, introduce you or pass along your resume or put in a good word for you. You're still going to have to earn it, but those things are pretty key. Like if you don't have somebody telling you it's a thing and somebody saying the position's open, and then when you apply, somebody literally says to the HR or the hiring manager like, "Hey, so and so just applied. I know them. I think you should give them a look." When you get those three things, that is a huge advantage. Then the person that's doing the hiring is going to like, okay, well, they're already thinking positively of you because of the connection with the inside man. Then they give you a shot. Then you go and earn it. But I think a lot of us are capable. It's like a lot of us can actually earn it. But the hard part is like getting the in. You can't being super productive doesn't always get you that. It's about connections, it's about meeting someone, it's about taking the time to you're going to strike out sometimes. You might think somebody could be your inside person and you spend some quality time with them and then they're not. So, it's a tough one, but it's so important. And I think some people just think they don't need it or they haven't realized how important that can be. Um let's go to the next chapter. So, for me, I just want to say at the very end here, this inside man concept has just really, really meant everything. Actually, I will give you um, another example really quick. So, not for the company I work for now, but my previous company, I'm on a team where I'm not in sales, and I I I happen to realize that someone on the sales team has quit. And just so happens that a high up person in the company that's normally not in town is in town and needs someone to go to lunch with. And they made plans with a guy that sat next to me. No, he wasn't on the guy that he made plans with wasn't on my team, but he sat sort of next to us. This is also a big deal guy. My team is sort of your entry level team, and all of my team members, there was three other people on my team, they got up and left and went to lunch without me. And the reason that they went to lunch without me was because they were all moms. They were probably 20 plus years older than me, and they had been working together a long time, and they had this routine of, every Wednesday or whatever it was, they went to lunch together. And so I'm now sitting at my desk and just working away, and I hear the big wig guy in sales say to the guy that sits next to me, "Hey, I thought we were going to lunch today." And the reason he said, I look over and the guy sitting next to me is like eating a sandwich. And I realize that the big wig guy has no one to go to lunch with now. And he's like, "Oh, sorry, I forgot." And I literally just stand up and I was like, "I'll go to lunch with you." And I mean, he had to have just like thought, well, I mean, he probably thought, "I don't want to go to lunch with you. I don't even know you. We've never spoken to each other." But I just stood up and blurted it out. And I didn't even know what to say next. I had no idea what he was going to say. But he says, "All right, let's go." And so I mean, it was so nice that he did that, right? So then he says, okay, we walk across the street, we go to the mall food court, says he wants to get something healthy, and he gets um, this like, it was like a gyro. I don't think it was healthy at all. But um, I didn't want to eat there either, but I was like, I don't care, whatever. So we get the food, we go and sit down, and we're talking, and I don't even know what to say. I'm just like trying to think, like, just I remember thinking, like, just be confident, just smile a lot. I was like, yep, smiling a lot, and trying to have lots of energy. And I was trying to just ask him, get to know him a little bit, really, because he did live pretty far away. I think he lived I was in Nebraska, and he was in Baltimore, I think. And he was telling me about how he traveled a lot for work. Um, and what that was like, missing his kids sometimes. And it was kind of interesting just to hear about his life. But then he did say something like, so what are you interested in work wise, like career wise? He asked me what my ambitions were. And I told him, that there was a position open on the sales team and I was really interested in it and I had planned on applying. And I think he was a little bit like, oh, well, I don't think he thought anything of like me wanting to go to lunch with him for that purpose. But I do think he thought, I'm not so sure because you're not from the sales world. And he kind of let me know that. And I was like, well, actually, I have this sales background, like also that you just don't know about. And here's what it is. And also, I worked for Gallup and I made these phone calls there. And so I'm used to making phone calls and I like sales. But I kind of got into this role. And he was like, oh, great, like that's perfect. Well, long story short, he goes and puts in a good word for me with the hiring manager and ended up getting the job. Now, I think that it was I mean, there was one other person that interviewed. The other person was from sales. I think it probably was 50-50. But I think I had the inside person that's told the hiring manager to give me a shot. The hiring manager and the inside person were friends. It wasn't like he had to choose me, but I think it was sort of 50-50, and I had the inside person. And it was sort of luck. It was one of those things where it was like all those things had to fit into place, but at the same time, I had already known I wanted that position and I'd already been thinking about applying. And even though I didn't think I was going to have an inside person, I had already kind of thought, like, well, how am I going to pitch myself? And so I was sort of prepared for it. And the inside person, you never know when they're going to pop up. So, yeah, I love that message. All right. So let's go on to the next one. The next chapter is called Crouching in the Bathroom. So Alex's next target was Tim Ferris. Tim Ferris needs no introduction, but in case you aren't familiar with him, I recommend you head over to his website. It's called The Blog of Author Tim Ferris. You can find everything you need to know there. He wrote The 4 Hour Work Week. I think that was probably what really put him on the map, but he is so much more than that. He's written other books. I think he's written The 4 Hour Body and a few other things. Plus, he's got his blog. He has countless pieces of advice. He has a podcast that's awesome. He interviews very successful people. He does cold emailing. Tim Ferriss is just pretty awesome. You can learn a ton from Tim Ferriss, and I highly recommend you check him out. But here, I'm going to tell the story of how Alex learned from Tim Ferriss. So, one second. Let me get some coffee. Okay. So he learns that Tim Ferriss is connected to a group called the Donor's Choice. And Alex actually knew the COO because, this is interesting, the COO spoke one time at one of Alex's classes. So it's not, again, this isn't like he has an in because his parents or because of whatever. Like, it's not like something that most people can't get. He's a student at USC, and this guy spoke at one of his classes. But he has an actual relationship with it. Excuse me. And the reason he has a relationship with him is because he makes an effort to run into him outside of, like, after the speech in the halls. Then he continues to see him on campus, and every time he does, he takes the time to talk to him, and then they stay in touch for years. So Alex does a really good job. You can tell throughout the whole book. He sort of maintains relationships with a lot of people, even if it's just here and there, in a way that is like, hey, we may not talk for months, but I'm still connected to you. We're maintaining this relationship. And there's sort of random people, like the COO of a group called Donor's Choice. Alex had nothing to do with that group. He wasn't a part of it. He didn't volunteer at it. He doesn't donate to it. But this guy was the COO of it, and he talked to one of his classes, and he just maintained the relationship with him. And that, I think, is a big lesson. So, anyway, he learns that Tim Ferris is also connected to that group. And so Alex reaches out to the COO, tells him about the mission. The COO says that I'm sorry. I can't. I just like. I'm sorry. The COO tells him, I will pass along your request for an interview to Tim Ferris. Now that actually doesn't go anywhere, and he doesn't get the interview. But Alex doesn't give up. He found out Tim's assistant's email address, and he starts firing off emails. Now she's not answering him. No response at all. Okay. So then, therefore, Alex has to try even harder. So he learned that Tim would be speaking in person at an event in San Francisco. So he uses his Price is Right money, and remember, he's in Los Angeles at USC, and he doesn't have any money, like, except for the fact that he won some money by hacking the Price is Right. He uses some of that, and he gets a trip to San Francisco. And at the event, he's like scanning the room and is like, okay, how am I going to talk to Tim Ferris after this event? And he's paid a lot of money, and he's come all the way to San Francisco, so he doesn't want to blow it. Like, he's got to figure out a way to talk to him. So he figures out that Tim's going to exit, and somehow he can see that there's a bathroom down the way that you would exit. So Alex goes and camps out in the stall of the bathroom, and he's like listening, and he can hear Tim talking, and he stays in the bathroom the whole speech. And then after the speech is over and he knows that Tim is exiting, he pops out of the bathroom, and he's waiting right there. And Tim ends up bumping into him, and he like blurts out like, "Hey Tim, I came here to talk to you," or something like that. And Tim's, I think, like a little bit taken aback by this. Like, this is super weird. And I think Tim's like, yeah, right, this is fake, haha. And Alex like whips out his printed emails and is like, no, I've been emailing your assistant about trying to talk to you. And Tim's like, okay, probably thinking like, this guy's crazy. But he ends up talking to him for a few minutes. Alex tells him about the mission. Tim says, okay, email me. We'll set up some more time to talk. And then Tim gets out of there, but it doesn't go anywhere. He still is not, he's not able to get in touch. Like, basically, he continues emailing and it doesn't go anywhere. So then Alex uses persistence, and he just continues to email Tim Ferris pretty much nonstop. And Alex doesn't know it, but eventually Tim called the COO of Donor's Choice because he did know that they were connected that way. And he says, what's wrong with this kid? And the COO says that he's a little bit rough around the edges, but his heart's in the right place. And so then Tim does the interview. I mean, it's just crazy. It's crazy. Like, you know, nobody would do something like that. Like they fly, they don't have they don't have very much money, and they use it to this huge long shot, like fly to a place where someone's talking. That'd be like me thinking I'm gonna fly to Taylor Swift's concert and then somehow try to work it out that I get to talk to her. I mean, maybe it doesn't quite, it's not the same scale because she's going to have a lot more security than Tim Ferris, but still, like the thought that this is actually going to work, it's pretty crazy. But so during the interview, Tim gives him lots of pieces of advice. I'm just going to call out two of them. Definitely go and read the book. You'll learn more about it. But here's two things that he really picks up on. So the concept of borrowed credibility. So Tim talks about how he borrowed credibility by volunteering for really well-known organizations. So he helped put on events, and then he signs emails as event producer with the Silicon Valley Association of Startup Entrepreneurs. And then he says you can do a Q&A interview for a well-known publication and then post the answers online. So basically, Tim has joined a lot of prominent organizations and he volunteers at them. He gives them his time, but then those things go on his LinkedIn and his resume, and he gets himself titles while he's in those organizations, and those titles give you credibility. If you're the event producer with Silicon Valley Association of Startup Entrepreneurs, that sounds like you produced a pretty big deal event for entrepreneurs. And all of a sudden, basically, everybody's thinking like, well, this guy's awesome, especially with entrepreneurs and startup entrepreneurs at that. Doing a Q&A for publication, and then you get your answers published online. So you're basically published now. And so the concept to me is just huge. I've done a couple things. I've tried to volunteer for committees. I've tried to get on boards if I can. They're not always easy. It's not always easy to do that sort of thing. Sometimes you have to find an inside person that's willing to help you. Okay, and then the second thing is the Tim Ferris email model. So Tim is a master cold emailer, and Alex had been doing cold emails, but he didn't really know how to do it. And Alex gives a lot of examples in his book about you can tell before he meets Tim Ferris emails and then after he meets Tim Ferris emails. And Tim talks a lot about this because during the process of Alex trying to get that interview with him, he sent Tim a lot of cold emails that weren't written very well. So then Tim says, you want to be persistent, but only about once a week. You don't ever want to be rude. You always come with your hat in hand, being humble. You put your question right in the email. So you tell the person why you're emailing them. There's no like being sneaky about it. And don't say thanks in advance. It sounds entitled. And Alex says thanks in advance, like every single email to Tim. So I'm putting my action for this one as borrowed credibility. And I don't want to dismiss the email thing. The cold email, I do think that there will come a time when I probably am going to have to master that. It's not something I enjoy doing. I just feel like it's such a difficult long shot. You have to get really good at sending cold emails. And even if you send the perfect cold email, it's such a long shot. You're going to get a lot of no's. But throughout the book, Alex's a lot of his biggest success come from a cold email. And so you can't deny it. And plus, Tim Ferriss says it's key. So I do think I'll have to get better at it. But for me, I'm going to start with borrowed credibility. I think that is just really speaks to me right now. It's something that I can work on, something that I enjoy. I enjoy volunteering. I enjoy getting to do things with organizations. And I've met so many amazing people that way. I've learned a lot. Usually, people recognize that you're new and you've never done it before. They don't expect a lot from you. And so you can kind of go under someone's wings and you can help out. You can really come in with a lot of energy, but everyone is okay with you being new in the beginning. Um, I I loved. I kind of felt like I'd fallen into some of that, but I didn't realize it could be a strategy that you could actually hone and get better at. So that's my big takeaway from this chapter. Um, there's certainly a lot of good ones, and cold emailing is absolutely a big takeaway as well. The next one is chi time. Chi time. Now, that is in reference to a guy named Chi Lu. He spells his name Qi, last name Lu, but it's pronounced Chi Lu. But before we do that, this is a quote from Steve Jobs. In 1 second, I'm gonna have some coffee. Okay. Steve Jobs said, "You cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future." Okay, so that really speaks to me because it's so true. Like sometimes in life, you don't realize how one thing that's happening right now, like maybe you get an inside person, you don't really know what that inside person might lead you to. But if they do lead you, and then like later on in life, like down the road, they will have led you to something, right? And then maybe that will have led you to something else. And then as you look back, you'll be like, well, the only reason I got this is because of this person. But when I first met him, I had no idea this was going to happen. So that's certainly been the case for me, but oftentimes you can't predict it. You just have to trust that the dots are going to connect. So I really like that. Makes a lot of sense. So, Alex, what does he do next? He volunteers at Microsoft. And remember, he just learned about borrowed credibility from Tim Ferris. So he volunteers at Microsoft. He meets someone at the director level, tells him about told him about the mission, his desire to interview Bill Gates. This person told him he should also interview a guy named Chi Lu. Um, so this time, Alex just gets the interview right away. I guess Chi doesn't get a lot of requests, and so he says yes right away. So the interview takes place on a Saturday, and no one else is in the building except for Chi Lu. So Chi Lu grew up in a rural village in Shanghai, China. This village has no running water or electricity. And at age 27, Chi Lu was making the most money he'd ever made in his entire life, and that was $7 a month. Now, 20 years later, he was the president of online services at Microsoft. So, he's making a lot more than $7 a month. And also, think about that. He doesn't really even get going until he's after 27 years old. Now, I mean, it's just kind of wild because most really successful people in the United States usually get off to a great start. This guy at 27 hadn't even started in the United States. So here's how he did it. Chilu got into college in Shanghai to study computer science. And one night when he's thinking about time and how he thinks about how it doesn't matter if you're a rice farmer or the president of the United States, we all get 24 hours a day. Then he thought about how much time he'd wasted in bed. So he starts cutting out 1 hour of sleep at a time. Eventually, he gets down to sleeping just 1 hour a night. He quickly learned that he needed more than 1 hour, and he figures out that like 4 hours is the perfect amount. And I can concur because you don't get a lot of sleep when you have a newborn. And what my wife and I figured out is that anything less than 4 hours and you're pretty much miserable. Your body's in like physical pain the next day, and mentally you're like in a fog. So if you don't get a solid 4 hours of sleep, it's horrible. And so that's why we came up with like the I don't remember what we called it. We had a name for it, but there was like a sort of a system where you get 4 hours and I get 4 hours. And so I would like fight through half the night, just like literally holding our daughter, pacing around the room so I wouldn't pass out from sleep deprivation. And then my wife would get 4 hours, and then she'd come down at like 3 in the morning, and I'd get from 3 till 7:30 or something. So like half an hour to fall asleep, and then I'd get 4 hours of sleep. And as long as you got 4 hours, you're pretty much okay. So Chi says it's all about consistency too. If you drive, and he uses an example like if you if you drive 16 miles an hour all the time pretty consistently, it doesn't wear out the car as much as if you're starting and stopping all the time. And so that's a good example because that's true. It's like it's not as good for the car to be stopping and starting all the time. So he consistently wakes up like 4 in the morning. He gets up, he runs, goes, I think it was like 5 miles, eats breakfast, and then he goes to work. He works 18 hours a day and he does that 6 days a week. He brings his meals with him. It's not, and so he's just kind of like grinding. I'm going to save you the math, but basically, back in China, when he was doing that, he was able to get a full 2 months of extra productivity compared to his coworkers because he was doing that regimented of a schedule. And um, so that's pretty crazy. An extra 2 months. Now, randomly, on what was his typical day off, where he would get on his bicycle and ride back home to see his mom and dad, it was raining too hard, so he has to stay in his dorm room in college. And a friend asked him to help fill a lecture hall. I guess there was a professor coming in from an out of town college, and they wanted the lecture hall to look like it had some people in it. And because it was raining so hard, there just wasn't as many people on campus. So Chi agrees to go, and the topic is something that he'd written 5 papers on. And I think that they'd even been published. So Chi's like really knowledgeable on this topic. He starts raising his hand and he's asking questions, and the professor is impressed by him and asks him to stick around after class. He tells the professor that he's written 5 papers on this, and the professor asks to see him. So he actually runs back to his dorm room, gets the papers, comes back, shows them to the professor. And the professor's like, wow, this is really impressive. Would you have any interest in coming to the United States and studying computer science there? And Chilu says yes. In fact, he's already like researched. He wanted to do that, but it was going to be like $60,000 to apply, and the two like he'd have to apply, go through some tests, and then it was $60,000 tuition, and he couldn't afford it. So he was like saving up for that possibility. And the professor says, "Well, take these tests, and if you pass, I'll waive the money. Like you don't have to pay at all." And of course, he does pass the test, and then he gets in. And so this is pretty crazy, right? Um, I mean, and I kind of skipped some stuff. Like basically, he'd already known about that program, so he'd been trying to save that 60,000 for a long time, and he was like on his way to that, but it was still going to be years away before he could afford it. And this professor just gives it to him on the spot. Now, here's something about luck. If Chi hadn't been randomly met this professor, probably never would have happened. Maybe he would have eventually made it on his own, but it would have been years later. But if he hadn't been working his butt off and written those 5 papers on that subject and been able to speak intelligently in the class, then he never would have like him he might have met the professor, but he wouldn't have been able to get that free tuition, if you will. Like they wouldn't have offered it to him. And Chi told Alex that luck is like a bus. If you miss one, there's always another one. But if you're not prepared, you won't be able to jump on. So Chi goes on to help create what we now know as, oh yeah, sorry, I'm not quite ready to say that, but this Chi Lu, he goes on when he comes to America and he helps create Yahoo's for one of their first search engines. Today, it looks like Yahoo Shopping. And then he ends up, Steve Ballmer hires him, who Steve Ballmer is like the owner of the Clippers. And I think he might have had something to do with, I don't know, but Steve Ballmer is a very rich dude. But he creates the Bing search engine. Now he works for Microsoft, as we know. So the action from this chapter is that find consistent time to work on the mission. So I kind of dumbed it down because, from my perspective in life, you kind of have to look at this with a grain of salt, I think. So yes, if you're Chi Lu and you're born in a village and you don't even have running water or electricity, and you're not married, and you're like, your whole purpose is just to get out of there. And obviously he was like incredibly smart. I mean, he goes on to write these search engines. He wanted to study computer science. He was obviously really capable and always had that in him. I don't know that that's a pretty advanced thing. I mean, I know a lot of smart people that probably couldn't have done that. And I know a lot of people that wouldn't be interested in doing something like that challenging. But they want to do they want to do successful things. They want to challenge themselves. I don't know, maybe it's just an American thing. Maybe it's something that like I don't quite understand, but I never wanted to sacrifice that much. Like, I don't want to work 18 hours a day, 6 days a week, even if it means that I'm going to be that successful. I just don't. And like, I want to work hard. And, when he was talking about the hidden reservoir, or sorry, no, that's the next chapter. Sorry, I was getting ahead of myself. But, like, I don't want to contradict myself and say, like, and I obviously know that anytime you're trying to start a business or do something extra, like, you have to really want it and you have to be willing to put in the time. And a lot of times entrepreneurs do sacrifice a lot. They sacrifice the time with their loved ones, especially their significant other. They sacrifice time with their kids. They sacrifice a lot, their time and energy, their sleep. So I get it. I get the message that you do have to sacrifice. Um, he didn't have running water or electricity and didn't want to be there. And so he sacrificed big time, 20 years from 27 to 47. That's like a huge, awesome part of your life. I mean, at a certain point, it's like diminishing because your body is, like not at 47, but who knows how long he's going to continue to do that. And there is a certain point where I hope to retire and spend like that quality time doing a lot of nice things like traveling, seeing things in the world. And then also there's a big part of me that just believes in the value of spending time with family and friends. So I just know that I don't want to sacrifice to the point of working 18 hours a day for 6 days a week. But that being said, I do want to sacrifice a little bit. So I'm putting that I'm finding consistent time to work on the mission. And I've actually heard someone, I can't think of his name right now, but he talked about how when you're like thinking about something you want to accomplish for the whole year. So, like, let's say you put a goal for 2024. If you don't block off time every week to work on that, you're not going to accomplish it. So, like, let's say you want to learn a new language, you want to learn how to speak Spanish. Well, you got to actually look at your calendar and block off the time and say, here's when I'm dedicating to learning Spanish. And then you have to do that. And every day and week and month, when that time comes around, you have to do it. You have to stop what you're doing and switch to that. Switch to learning Spanish, whether it's speaking or going to a class or doing an online live class, or like, how are you going to do it? Come up with a plan. And then every time when you get to that dedicated time, you do it. And if you don't do that, then you're not going to learn Spanish. And so I get it. Like, you have to figure out how much are you willing to sacrifice, and make sure that it makes sense. So I do believe that you 100% have to take the action of finding time to work on your mission. I'm not going to talk about the unhealthy. I'm not going to advocate that we all work 18 hours a day, 6 days a week. So that's kind of my takeaway. The last chapter here in step 2 is called The Hidden Reservoir. Now, I am going to kind of skip a bunch here. So definitely go, like I said, go back and read the book. Now, the first part of this chapter is all about him attempting to do an interview with Bill Gates. And he doesn't get it. It's not going anywhere yet. And so he's a little bit down about that. Chi Lu knows Bill Gates. Now, remember, he was a high up president at Microsoft. He goes and does the interview with Chi Lu. Him and Chi Lu hit it off, and he tells Chi Lu about how he wants to interview Bill Gates too. And he says, you know what? I can pass along that message. And then he's emailing Bill Gates' assistant, and it's not going anywhere. So he's bummed. And so then he starts thinking about other people on his list, and one of them is Sugar Ray Leonard. So Alex attends a book signing of Sugar Ray Leonard's, and security's not letting him get to Sugar Ray. He doesn't really talk about how far he had to go to get to that book signing, but it doesn't work. So he goes back to Old Faithful and he uses a cold email approach. He's able to get a meeting set up with Sugar Ray's public relations person. And he writes Sugar Ray a letter. The public relations person gives it to Sugar Ray, and they get a meeting. And this is just another one of those things that kind of blows my mind. Like, Sugar Ray isn't like as famous as some people, but he was a world champion boxer. Like, and Alex is nobody. And there is no inside man. He just emails the publicist, but he doesn't know the publicist. It's not like he's built a relationship with the publicist. He just emails him. So somehow that's enough. They do meet in person once, and then he gets the meeting. So I don't get it how he's able to do that, but he gets the meeting. And he shares with Sugar Ray his struggles about the interviews. And this is what Sugar Ray tells him. He says, 5 years after Sugar Ray turned pro from boxing, he steps into the ring with Thomas the Hitman Hearns. And Sugar Ray's in the fight. And he's been getting hit in the face so many times that his eyelids turn black and blue and purple and they're swollen shut. And he can't even barely see out of them because they're like, sometimes how like a boxer can get that swollen eye. And he says eventually, and he says he goes back into the corner during one of the little, like, the bell rings, and he goes to his corner and he's sitting there, and the trainer comes over and is like, you're blowing it. Like, this is and basically whoever wins this fight is going to be the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. And the trainer's like, you're blowing your shot. And so Sugar Ray says something just clicked for him in that moment when his trainer was saying those words to him. And he says people are going to have heart. Their heart's going to be in the right place. But when they're trying to do something, eventually your mind is going to start to tell you, man, forget this. And you may have a wish, you may have a desire or a dream, but it has to be more than that. And you have to want it to the point that it hurts. And he says most people never will. Now, I just got done saying, like, I don't want it bad enough that I'm willing to work 6 days a week, 18 hours a day. But even Alex admits that that was too much and that he wasn't going to do that. I don't think it's the message isn't that. It's not that you have to work your life away and sacrifice. The message is that you're going to ask for interviews and be told no, and you're going to have to be okay with that rejection and just keep fighting, right? So Sugar Ray says you've got to tap into what he calls the hidden reservoir. Somehow, Sugar Ray comes crashing out of the 13th and 14th round, and he knocks out the Hitman Hearns and becomes the heavyweight undisputed champion of the world. And he looks over to Alex. He shows him this heavyweight belt. Alex gets to try it on, and he says, how many people have told you you're not going to be able to interview this type of people? Like, no way, you're not interviewing Bill Gates, you're not interviewing Warren Buffett, you're not interviewing Lady Gaga or Steven Spielberg. People just don't get those type of interviews. Or like not people like you who are nobody. But then he says, don't let anyone tell you that your dream isn't possible. When you have a vision, you have to stick with it. And you've got to use the hidden reservoir. So I put my action as use the hidden reservoir. It's very vague. What does that really mean? I think for me, it's that you're going to feel defeated when you're going after whatever your mission is. And you're going to want to quit at times. And you really have to ask yourself, like, again, go back to that reflection on life and be like, was I headed in the right direction? And then you think about and figure out what your mission is. And if you're getting to that point where you want to give up, then you should go back and think, okay, reevaluate. Like, is this still what I want? Do I still want to go after this? Because I always knew it was going to be hard. And don't listen to other people saying no, like that's stupid, you can't do it. And you have to be realistic. Like, um, I don't want to say be realistic, like don't go after big dreams, but like if you're about to like lose your house because you just are going after your dream but you didn't like be prepared, like there's a lesson he learns later in the book where he thinks about dropping out of college so that he can go after his mission. And some advice that he gets is you don't have to drop out of college, but you can ask for an extension and just like skip one semester. And then after one semester, you can use that time to work on your mission and see, like, does it make sense to go back to college? Like, you can reevaluate. So there's other things you can do, but don't do extremes. But at the same time, the big thing is don't let other people tell you when to quit. You decide. You go back and look, do I have it in me to keep trying? When this is like when it gets really, really, really hard, when you're just trying everything and you just keep getting no, no, no. All right. So I hope that this has been helpful. These were the 4 chapters of step 2. Again, the actions that we learned here are find your inside man, borrowed credibility, find consistent time to work on your message, and go out and find your hidden reservoir. I love this book. Let me just flip through and we'll see what step 3 is. You can get a little preview of that for next time. So step 3 is called Find Your Inside Man. And it's actually going to expand on that. So we're going to have the Dream Mentor. So the Dream Mentor is a little bit different than the Inside Man because the Inside Man is like could be your inside man for anything. Just like help me get into this organization, but has nothing to do with my mission. The Dream Mentor is like sometimes you can find somebody that's basically doing what you want to do and they're going to teach you how to do it. Chapter 9 is the rules. This next one is going to be huge. Chapter 10 is adventures only happen to the adventurous. 11 is bite off more than you can chew. 12 is that's how you do business. 13, exponential life. 14, the avoidance list. 15, you can't out Amazon. 16, no one ever asks. And 17, it's all gray. Thank you for checking it out this time. Thanks for tuning in and listening. If you're still listening, it would mean a lot if you could go to the YouTube channel and give me a subscription there. I'm trying to get to 50 so that I can do YouTube lives. Thank you very much and have a good night.